I'm Debbie Lucci from the Deborah Lucci team from William Ravis Realtors, and I'm here today with Matt Witte. Matt Witte is with William Ravis as well. I have a team, Matt has a team, and we're here today to talk about what are your options when you're writing up an offer. So you have a lot of options, Matt. What do you think?
You do. You have tons of options, and we know the options have changed in the last few years.
Big time.
And the unfortunate thing, I find that a lot of buyers feel like they don't have an option for a home inspection. How do you feel about that?
I think maybe you have the wrong realtor who's talking to you about your offer. You have a lot of options. I mean, I think that nobody should tell you exactly, the realtor shouldn't tell you exactly what to do, but they should give you the option so you should feel comfortable with what you have. So let's talk about a home inspection. So what do you think some of your options are regarding a home inspection? What can the buyers do? And a lot of it comes down to, as a buyer's agent, part of our job is to call the listing agent, find out how many offers are on the table, see if there's anything going on. Can you give me some information regarding, the different contingencies and what's going on, right, like that. So then we kind of inform the buyer about that so they can make the right decision.
Exactly. And speaking of the home inspection, like we've talked about interviewing agents, I think it's important to know the pluses and minuses of all the different home inspectors that are out there. Definitely. And make sure that they don't just select one. I know that we tend to recommend a few, but they are not all equal. I had inspector, I forget what the pricing was, but I'm seeing a lot of $600 to $800 on average for a home inspector. It differs if it's a condo or a 20-room house. It could be more, of course. But I had a client years ago that was really shopping the inspectors, and they ended up hiring an inspector for $250. And they told me, we have this inspector for $250. Oh. And he went through the house, and he was fine, overall, like it looked fine. But then he handed, I'm not making this up, he handed them a piece of paper with the notes of the deficiencies of the home. Now, we had a pretty bad electrical issue. And the listing agent said, "You're joking," when I handed her the paper. Like, I took a picture. She goes, "You're joking." And that put us in a real bind. So with the home inspection, make sure that you're shopping home inspectors. It's not just check off or not check off the home inspection. There's more to it.
Matt, did this person work for a company or by themselves? And
They're independent. Yeah, definitely independent.
Okay. All right. That's another reason you should hire a buyer's agent, because then we can give you, really kind of narrow list of who we recommend who are good, opposed to just a big list if you don't hire us. So
totally.
Yeah, that's scary. So like some of the options when you're writing up an offer, and, we talk about this a lot on our team, is you don't really know how you were going to approach the home inspection until you write up an offer on the property or see what's going on for activity. So if you get no offers on the table, you might approach it very differently than if you have like 30 offers on the property, and you won't know that until, your buyer's agent calls the listing agent and finds those things out. But like with my sister, okay, we put an offer on a home in Wakefield, and there was a lot of things wrong with it. And, it's hard to deal when it's with your relatives. My sister's very easygoing, but you feel a lot of pressure, when it's going. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I said to her, she started wanting all these contingencies in there. And I said, "You're not going to get your offer accepted. There's like 10 offers on the table." I said, "Here's your offers for home inspection. You can put a home inspection in. You can make it a very tight date, or you can make it like 7 to 10 days, which is typical." I said, "But I want to let you know," I called the agent, "she has multiple offers with no home inspections." And my sister said to me, "I don't feel comfortable doing no home inspection." That's okay. That's all right. So call the listing agent. Always check with the listing agent. I never sneak an inspector in there behind anybody's back. I can't stand when that's done that to me.
That's the worst.
It is the worst.
Yep.
So is it okay if we do a pre-home inspection? Sure. Okay. So we went in there. She knew what she was dealing with. And then she put the number on the offer, and she felt very comfortable. So you can cross out the home inspection if you want, but you got to remember, that's it. You own it. If there's problems regarding, that's not a contingency anymore. Or you can do pre-home inspection if you're allowed. You don't want to put the listing agent in the position where the seller comes up to the house, the inspector's walking out with the tool belt and the listing agent has not been informed of what's going on.
Such
That's
a bad idea, right?
not a good way to start the relationship with the listing agent.
Mm-mm.
Ask, get the seller's permission.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can put a full-blown home inspection in there. Or you can do a cap, right? You can do a cap. Like I won't negotiate anything under, let's say, $10,000. Or you could say something like, we're only going to come back for like health or structural issues.
Sure, yeah.
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 So you get a lot of options there. You don't have to just, well, if I don't cross everything out, I'm not going to get it. You have to have somebody that's on your side kind of thinking about your options, and you have to feel comfortable doing this. This is your house that you're going to be buying, you know?
Definitely. I 100% agree. And it's how you present it to the agent as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you call the agent and say, I'm representing, Jane Smith. Jane owns 4 multifamily properties. She comes from a line of contractors. She, like they want to know, like, who's buying this?
Yes.
Is it, you know what I mean? Like, is it a contractor? Is it, a first time buyer? Is it,
Yeah.
so give them a little bit of information that's going to make them feel like, all right, they can handle this. They're doing a home inspection, but.
Right. Especially like the house my sister bought, it was an estate sale. Nobody knew anything about the house. So you're walking in, they can't fill anything out. You know, have no
Right.
seller's statement, no frequently asked questions, nothing. So you know nothing. So, and then we kind of let her think about it a little bit because there was a lot of things that kind of came up. And
Yeah.
after she kind of settled down and looked at it, we kind of, but she was happy she did the pre-home inspection.
Good. That's a good suggestion. I don't think a lot of people know, or they may know and just don't suggest it because I think it's a great idea.
Right. So, and you don't have to you can get a good inspector that your buyer's agent can recommend. And you don't have to have a full blown home inspection. Like I'll say to my sister, just we call it a quick and dirty. Okay. So you're in there doing a quick and dirty home inspection for, let's say, like an hour opposed to 2.5 hours. You're not checking every little plug. You're checking
Exactly.
termite damage, mold, anything structural, water issues, the big stuff.
Big stuff. Yeah.
Right. That's what you're concerned about.
Totally.
So, yeah. So
I was going to say, what about deposit money? So the typical is 5% of the asking price. If the consumer has that, we'll assume they do just for fun here. So 5%. Do you think it matters how much your first deposit is and your second? So let's say that the house is $800,000. So you have $40,000 of deposit money. Do you break that up in any sort of increment, or do you think it doesn't matter?
It's funny because it really, in the long run, when you think about it, it really doesn't matter. Okay, if it closes, it closes. That's it. But in a lot of times, in the eyes of the seller, they feel that they may be more serious if they put more money down. So it's not necessarily, something like, let's say, for example, by the time you do the purchase and sale, you're putting 5% down total. First deposit and second deposit equal 5%. The seller may feel if you're putting $10,000 down with the offer, it looks like she's more serious than the offer that's only got $1,000 down, even though by the time you hit the purchase and sale, the whole total is still 5%. And
True.
Some people put down 10% total. So I think in the eyes of the seller, a lot of times, if it's really coming down to kind of the neck and neck, that can make a little bit of a difference,
Yeah, I agree. I think it's psychological, and it's kind of like the cherry on top, but I don't think it's typically the difference maker. Mm-hmm. I've never seen it come down to, well, they put a bigger first deposit than you did. I've never seen that before, where that was the deciding factor, but it won't hurt.
Right.
Have you seen anyone do non-refundable deposits? I've seen it twice.
Typically, the only time I've ever seen it if all the contingencies are dropped off. I really haven't seen them non-refundable if the contingencies are still there. Maybe once, like in 26 years, I don't see that too
often. Yeah. I had it once with a buyer and where I was representing, and the listing agent had 40 offers or something like that. And he said, he was great. He gave us a lot of information, way more than I expected. Like this number of people are waiving, this number of people are waiving, that this particular, we have 5 non-refundable deposits. So I just wrote it all down.
Yeah,
Went
but
back to the buyers.
how many agents didn't even make the call to find that information out?
Yeah, good call. Exactly. Well said. Yeah, well said. I always pick up the phone.
Yeah.
I always pick up the phone. Yeah, I want to. It's almost like court. You know, you almost feel like they're on the stand, and you're not trying to trick them, but you're trying to get as much information as you can to help the client, and that's all it is. You know, and I know they do it to me too. You know, like they know like how I'm trying to get them on the phone, and it's not that I'm dodging them, but sometimes it's hard to answer everybody's phone call. But he was good and gave us all the information. I laid it all out. And they did end up waiving a lot of stuff. In fairness, they had a lot of money, a lot. I mean, they're financing, but they had an unbelievable amount of means that if something went wrong, they could handle it. They did the home inspection right after they closed. Nothing really came up. The house was pristine. But they did gamble on the non-refundable deposit. And then recently, as a listing agent, we received a non-refundable deposit. And it was really helpful because the seller was kind of, I would say a nervous guy, but just cautious, you know, like very cautious with the scenario and everything and looking at all the offers carefully. And we signed everything. And I think we got like a $40,000 non-refundable. And I wanted to put them at ease. I said, there's 40,000 reasons they're going to want to make this get to closing. And it was a cash sale. So other than an act of God, it was going to close. So that's a big ticket item to gamble on.
Right. But if you think about it, you get no home inspection, you've got no financing, you've got really no contingencies.
Yeah, the cash one did not have anything. The other people were financing, so they had a little bit of a gamble.
Right, right.
You know?
So that person just made themselves look even stronger by saying that language. That was a really good move.
It was, and they were up against it. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. It was brutal. It was a brutal, you know, like 24-hour final. You know, and you know what it's like when you get that many offers. Like this is absolutely, and that was during the pandemic. You know, when we were seeing those kind of things. Rates were a little different back then. What about purchase and sale? Do you have a specific number of days from when the offer is presented that you'd like the purchase and sale done? Do you think there's any advantage to that?
Yeah, if they, you know, it's funny because when I see agents write up offers, if I have several offers in front of me, it's almost like they've cheated off each other because we've been trained so much the same way. You know, home inspection, 7 to 10 days from, you know, acceptance of offer, 14 days for P&S acceptance of offer, you know, 4 weeks out from acceptance of offer for the commitment letter, and then, you know, like 4 or 5 weeks, and then 6 weeks to close. So if you line them all up, you know, that's when you really have to understand how to negotiate to differentiate yourself from everybody else. So, you know, everybody wants the purchase and sale signed yesterday, but it depends. Are they doing a home inspection? If they're doing a home inspection, you have to wait till after the home inspection is done. And then I think you have to be fair to the attorneys. You can't say, you know, look, I want the purchase and sale done tomorrow, and they can't do it.
No, you can't. Right. No, you can't. Well, we aggressively on the buy side will try to do 7 days and then get the purchase and sale out immediately, even though we're doing a home inspection, you know. So if they're using one of the attorneys that I recommend, they're good. They're good with this. They're used to this, you know, like, all right, this is how it goes. And they don't start doing billable hours and things like that, you know, so.
Right. Especially if they know there's a home inspection coming, at least they have that kind of time period to, you know, kind of fill in the blanks a little bit before you know, it's done. So yeah, but you try to keep those tight as well. You want to get this moving along because if something happens, that house is off the market for all that period of time, and you know, it's not good for the seller. So you have to, if you want your offer accepted, you have that. Those are things that make you look more attractive.
Definitely. Right. What about closing date? Let's say it's a typical conventional financing. What do you like to see from the listing agent side?
So I really fall back on, to me, I think it's very important what the seller is doing. You know, that's an important feature that I try to find out. Like, it may not matter at all to the seller, okay? But that could be a sticking point. Like, let's say, for example, the seller's got new construction. They're not sure if it's going to be done or not. Boy, you could look attractive if you were a little bit flexible. Let's
Yeah.
say the seller bought another home and they're closing on this date and they really want to close at the same exact time. You could look really attractive by trying to line that up as much as possible. So I think a lot of times the closing date is a good thing. You know, if you could be a little bit flexible with things, you know, that could be a good selling point. But I think, you know, I think that the thing is, as a buyer's agent, you've got to call the listing agent what
True.
is important to that seller. And
Exactly.
sometimes I have seen a seller leave $50,000 on the table because there was a home inspection. Well, no, it wasn't a home inspection. It was financing. The
Hmm.
buyer was financing on one deal. It was 50,000 more than the other person. And then the past experience of the seller, they got screwed so bad because of someone's financing that they took
Hmm.
that cash off of 50,000 less.
No kidding. Wow.
Yeah. So it all comes, what's important to the seller. And I think and you know, too, when you're a listing agent and people just send an offer in, I love it when they send an offer in with the home sale contingency. They don't call you. They don't tell you any, you know, is the house on the market? Is it under agreement? I mean, is it ready to close tomorrow? You have no idea. They don't call you and tell you anything.
Right.
So I think it's important as a buyer's agent. That's why you need the right buyer's agent to to do that, to call that listing agent. And I think
Yeah.
that's why it's good to have relationships with agents, eh, you know, and play
Definitely.
nice in the sandbox so you don't get a bad
Yeah.
reputation out there.
Exactly. And we don't want that. Yeah,
So
I mean, I've
another,
even called listing agents and said, when do they want to close? Tell me the exact date.
right,
You know, or would a use and occupancy be helpful? You know,
yes.
like
And
give
the
them
thing,
the options. Yeah.
right. So now this new trend, which was not, which was a bad thing when I first started in real estate, pre-approval amounts. Okay. So in the olden days, when I first started, you would never get a pre-approval that was more than you were willing to pay for the house. Okay. Now you get the
Hmm.
biggest pre-approval that you can possibly afford because the seller looks at it like, oh yeah, I know, you know, I know that they're $10,000 less than the other offer, but they can afford so much more. So they must be more solid than the other buyer. That's how, like when I presented offers, this is how these sellers perceive things a lot of times. So it's these,
It's spot on. It's because we do the same thing. I've gotten calls, and the buyer will say the lender only wants to use the pre-approval for the amount we're offering. And I said false. I want it for the biggest number, even though we're not going to use it. For that reason, the big because it had changed quickly. You know, where we didn't want to show them how much money you have, and now,
right.
like you said, we want to really show them.
And that's so funny because remember before what you would do is you'd have the mortgage broker on stand. Okay, we're going up 10,000. Can you give me a new pre-approval? All right, we're going up another 10.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
now you just write the number out, you get it over with, and
I
go.
remember that we had three pre-approvals. How funny was that? I forgot
Right.
about that.
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
you think it's important from the listing agent perspective to call the lenders? So let's say you have two offers that they're almost the same. Do you think it matters?
I always call the lender.
Me too.
That's part of my always. And what I ask them is, what have you checked? And
Hmm.
I can tell by the response. It's sort of like I'm waiting to hear. I've done 4 loans with this guy. I know him really well. You're not going to have a problem with him. Or it's like, yes, credit's fine. Yep. Checked his income. Really doesn't know him. Really hasn't. You know what I mean? So I get a different.
Yes.
It, yeah, that's what I want to
Yeah.
know. I don't want to know personal information. I'm kind of
Yeah.
looking at, and it's big. Okay, it's really big. Like how secure does that mortgage broker feel
Hmm.
with that buyer? And also, who's the mortgage broker?
Yes.
Okay,
100. Yes, 100%. We've had unnamed companies that have canceled loans that were well qualified out of nowhere.
unbelievable. I mean, like if I see the certain people I see that pre-approval come across the desk, I'm like, this thing's closing. This man would not have put this pre-approval out
That's
if this
true.
thing was not closing. So it's just
Yeah.
this level of confidence opposed to some of these larger banks that we've talked about before. and one I'll never forget for the rest of my career. The day of the commitment, sorry, I didn't know he was getting gift money from a foreign country. We can't finance him. What?
Yeah. Yeah. You didn't check that before?
Right.
And
So
there's
I'm
lenders, there's big lenders that are, their model is the brokers that work for them, the mortgage brokers, get paid per pre-approval. Send out pre-approval, you get paid. Dun, 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 dun. Now that makes me very uncomfortable.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And the thing is too, you don't want to be the listing agent. You don't want to be the buyer's agent either, but you don't want to definitely be the listing agent. And the buyer's agent has asked you for an extension like 3 times. Oh my God. You don't want anything. That is just stressful. You
Yeah.
want a mortgage broker. The team of people that you have, I think, between the attorneys and the mortgage brokers, you got to have a good team behind you. When you
You
get the player,
100%. Yeah,
yes, yeah,
100%. And here's a fun fact that Debbie didn't know I was going to bring up. So years ago, before I worked at Ravens as another company, and I was representing a buyer that I known a long time, and I told them, you want to use, and I'll name drop it. You want to use Liz Ryan from at that point she was a Guaranteed Rate, a good
yep.
local company. This is who you want to use. She is a closer. She's a machine. And he said, that's nice, but we're going to use so-and-so bank. Okay. Now, the fun fact is this was on Debbie Lucci's listing on Pleasant Street in North Andover. I don't know if she remembers this house. Okay.
No,
But yeah, it's up on the hill, and on the back, it's all like farmland. It's a beautiful house. And
yeah,
you had like,
beautiful view. Yeah.
beautiful view. You had 30 offers. And back then we were allowed to do home inspections. So we did a home inspection. And then I remember mortgage commitment was coming up and we weren't going to make it. And I called you and you said, they can figure it out. We don't need to extend the mortgage commitment. I was dying. So I go back and I'm dying and I'm like, oh my God, they have to figure. And they ended up getting it like by the skin of their teeth. And I thought, this is the reason you can't gamble at $550,000 with a local bank. And in fairness, my friend did say, he goes, that was the biggest mistake we made in this transaction was working with that person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, it's funny because Nicole on my team, and she said, when I see, like Touchstone or Bill Dalton come across and, her husband's a mortgage broker, or another mortgage broker we have locally come across, we know that this deal is going to make it. It's going to be fine. Because there's so many moving parts to this stuff. You want to make sure you have the right, and local people, I think, are the way to go. I like working with local people,
Totally. And I don't mind name dropping people during the discussion with the listing agent. Here's the lender. Here's the intended home inspector.
Yeah.
And here's, like you did, you referenced some very good attorneys there, so here's one of the good attorneys they plan on using. These are all closers here, these people.
Yeah. You got to have your team of people. I think that that's very important. So speaking of that, let's talk about financing. What are your options when it comes to the commitment date and letter and all? I mean, the commitment, all this stuff here. Like, I always hear, you have a buyer and they haven't gotten pre-approved and they're sort of like, well, I'm not really worried about that. I'm fine. I'll get a pre-approval. And you say, well, how I kind of put it to them is, we find your dream home. It's Sunday afternoon. You have to have it now. Okay.
Right.
How are we going to buy it? How are we going to buy it if you don't have a pre-approval? How are we going to do these things? Are we going to overpay for the house to get your offer accepted and maybe get a pre-approval within 24 hours is like the worst thing that you can say on an offer?
Totally.
Why would you have? Right.
Yeah.
So
gotta have it all ready.
Yes. So on the financing, so let's talk about financing dates, appraisals, what are the different options with that, things like that.
Yeah.
So
I selfishly will do a week prior to closing. And most listing agents honestly don't even bring it up. Like, I'm talking 99 out of 100. One will, and it's usually I'd like it 2 weeks before, which seems to be reasonable. And to be honest with you, it's fine. It's the lenders that I recommend don't have trouble hitting those dates. As long as the buyer pushes everything in, we're good to go, but Obviously, the earlier the better. I can't stand when it says like 3 days before closing. I'm like,
Yeah, I might be
what?
one of those people that calls you out on the 2 weeks because I just can't imagine the furniture being moved and all of a sudden, no, I'm sorry, we can't do financing. So I like the 2 weeks ahead of time.
2 weeks is great.
Right.
There's no question about it. So I think that's one of the dates I find kind of sneaks in.
Right. So now here's one that somebody surprised me on. Okay. She came in, she crossed out the finance contingency. So even though you're doing a mortgage, you can cross out the finance contingency.
Yep.
Okay. You still have to have like a pre-approval. You have to prove somehow you can buy this house. And you should be upfront to the listing agent and say, look, we're crossing out the finance contingency, but this is not a cash offer. We are getting a loan. Just so when the appraiser shows up, the seller doesn't say to the listing agent, I thought this was a cash offer. What is the appraiser showing up for? And then
Yep.
everybody gets upset. Okay. So
Exactly.
just be upfront about it. So
Yep.
now here's a question for you. Crosses out the finance commitment. Does that mean the appraisal is crossed, it's not subject to appraisal, or is it still subject to an appraisal?
The appraisal, the way I'm reading as a listing agent, is irrelevant. Is irrelevant. Whether it appraises, not appraises, doesn't matter. They have to come up with it.
Okay, now it's funny because I can remember the exact house. Okay, it was on Delphi Circle in Andover. She crossed out the financing, and I said to her, because I'm assuming now it's not subject to appraisal, right?
Yeah.
And she said, oh, no, no, no. It's still subject to appraisal. And I said, you gotta write that. We're not going to take that. You got to put that in there that this is not subject to appraisal. I want it in writing. So now,
Writing. Yeah.
even if they cross out the finance contingency, I say this is you're going to no appraisal, right? It's not subject to appraisal. I make them write it in there because I never thought that she would assume that the appraisal was still in play if the financing was crossed out, and she did. She assumed that. So instead of any gray areas, we like to keep
Yeah.
it black and white as possible.
Yeah, it's a good habit to get into, and it's with your experience. You've seen that probably quite I was gonna say a lot. I've only seen that recently. I'm talking like twice
Yeah.
in 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
and I get excited when I see it as a listing agent. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. It doesn't matter. They have to buy it. They have no way out of it,
Right.
And both of those ended up closing, and it was good. And I don't, to my knowledge, they had no appraisal issues. And if they did, it wasn't our problem. We didn't hear about it.
Right,
So they did.
Yeah. So you can still cross out financing if you're financing it. It depends on how comfortable you feel with your situation. I remember, when I bought a little condo here in the North End, I mean, I knew I was going to get financing. I just crossed it out, so
Yeah.
no problem. So, but you have to feel comfortable about that. And the buyer's got to talk to their mortgage broker a little bit and feel comfortable with that. But you can
Yeah.
still do that. Just because the finance is crossed out doesn't mean it's cash necessarily.
Right. And did you happen to remember, did you put subject to acceptable review of condo docs? Because that would have saved anything.
In Boston at that time, they wanted your firstborn.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean,
So
you didn't put anything down.
nothing. You put nothing. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good.
Right. So that's right. It's not.
I would try to say if we're in major competition like you're kind of describing, you have to review everything as quick as possible. Like we don't even want it in there.
Right. So, but that's another good option. That's another good contingency that you can put in there, subject to
It's a good one.
attorney review of condo docs and budget and stuff like that. That can buy you a little bit of time if you get a condo.
I love putting that in with no date.
That's a contingency all the way to the closing.
All the way to closing. There's something unacceptable here. We just found it.
I wanted my chihuahua to show up.
That's another thing we talk about too. Is I've literally written in the dog, like this dog is permitted, to reside in the condo, because I know that if we bought and we couldn't take the dog, we would eat the deposit. You know what I mean? Before we give up that dog. You know?
I can see how you feel that way. I feel strongly about the animals too.
It's true. You've seen the videos of the dog. You know how I feel.
See, I know you got to really, when you look at an offer, you got to look at the fine print. You really have to look at every little.
Oh, you do. And you know what's funny that's not funny is the forms that we use are different than some of the Boston forms. So when that
Definitely.
Boston form comes in, it's so small in the middle. You need to like really dig that out because I almost missed something that was pretty important
Yeah.
because they're squeezing everything into almost one page.
I mean, they're almost a little bit, they've seen a lot of stuff in Boston. They operate a little bit different than the suburbs, but when they come out, you start seeing this stuff like, whoa, you know.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
we would always put subject to review of condo docs and budget. You wouldn't put an offer in without something like that. But in the city, it's like, what are you, crazy? I'm
Right.
not doing that. You know?
Don't put anything.
Right, exactly. So what about appraisal? You can waive
Yeah.
appraisal. You can put
Yeah.
subject to an appraisal.
Yeah. I like on the buy side, if they can do it to offer appraisal gap, some sort of coverage, like we'll pay 20,000 over the up to the purchase price, the agreed purchase price, if it doesn't happen to appraise.
Right.
You know,
Right.
I like that as a buyer's agent. If they feel comfortable doing it.
Right. So you get a lot of options in an offer.
Hmm. Yeah, there's a lot, isn't there? You start combing through it.
Right.
You know,
We've been doing that training the new agents. I have like a whole list. This is your home inspection options, financing options, things like that. Yeah, you don't have to go into a house necessarily and cross everything out just to get it. You got to have.
You don't. And the last two deals I've done that closed in the last 10 days have both had home inspections, and they weren't cash deals. So
Mhm.
if you take what we talked about, right, you take that whole package and you make it, the whole thing somewhat advantageous to the seller, they can get past it.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And there's nothing wrong with the pre-home inspection. You just got to make sure you give the inspector notice. He's not going to fly over there in 30 minutes. You have to, give him a little bit of notice.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's a good option. I think a lot of people don't use. I can only
Yeah.
think of one person all year that did a pre and home inspection on a listing I had.
Yeah, it helps
All right.
confuse the buyer.
Okay. Awesome. Well, Debbie Lucci, that was great. How do people reach you?
My phone number is 978-771-9909, and my website is wherehomesgetsold.com.
And mine is 978-273-0099. And email is matt.witte@ravis.com. And I think I added extra information, so I'll throw in my website as well, wittesellshomes.com. My guess is, Debbie, we'll see this come across the screen, right? All that information. I think that our graphics expert is starting to really hammer it home on the way out of here. So
Good.
shout out
Excellent.
to Adam Prescott, all the great work that he does. And thank you. That was fun.
Okay, take care.